Well, at age 13, Brent Shepherd was diagnosed with an acute form of leukemia followed by toxic shock syndrome and was not expected to survive. The family and many others started praying. Brent is here with us many years later, so you have an idea of how things turned out, but it's a story that's so encouraging that we wanted him to share it with you. So joining Brent also to help fill in the details is his father, David Shepherd. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. Cool. Now, David, you followed my father in pastoring the church in Bethel, Hamilton, that Dad pastored for a number of years, and then you went on, became the district superintendent of the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada for Western Ontario, and now you have your Life2Life Ministry, where you help in various ways and in blessing, continue to minister to a lot of people. And Brent, you pastor in Tillsonburg, Ontario, lead pastor there. Yeah. And so it's great to have these a couple of pastors here with us. And I love the name Shepherd has got to be the best pastor's name I could ever think of. But we need to step back a bit. And Brent, maybe you can take us back to this young 13-year-old and what happened.
Sure. Yeah, the beginning of that was, at 13 you care about a couple things, hanging out with your friends and recess and sports. Right. And that's what I was as a young boy that just loved that. And that was my life. I loved life and enjoyed it, and it was quite a shock as this story unfolds. But I had a nosebleed and I couldn't get it stopped. It was something, I thought it was the dry weather. Went to the doctor, and he said to me, to my mom and I, he said, well, I got it stopped, but is there anything else? And I said, well, I've got some bruising on my leg. And so he said, well, let's get some blood work done. And then within 24 hours, they had diagnosed me with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And I was in chemotherapy shortly after that. And it was just a really rapid pace. I remember sitting in the hall, sitting at the end of the hall in my room when the doctor had called. I remember thinking, I've got to go to the hospital? I don't feel sick. It was a real shock. And when we got in the hospital, it was really fast from there. And a lot of my memories of those times are blurred, because shortly after that, only about a week or so after that, I contracted another disease called toxic shock syndrome. And that one attacks the muscles of the body, where leukemia attacks the blood, and the white blood cells are malfunctioning, the ones that fight infection. I received another disease that attacks the muscles, and I started to go downhill very rapidly, and eventually ended up in ICU, and I was in a coma. And those details are details that, being in a coma, I don't know the surrounding details of that moment, but
right.
Well, my dad's here.
That's what you're here for. So David, you and Connie, I can't imagine what you were going through as this was going on, but just, tell us what was happening.
Well, when they discovered the leukemia, I was out of town, and so Connie was alone. And she took Brent to the doctor. The next morning, he said he was concerned. The next morning, he called and gave her the instructions about going to the hospital. And if she would hear what she would mention, she knew in her heart it was serious. She went to the dining room table and opened her Bible, said, God, I need something from you to help me. And the Lord took her to Psalm 103, who heals all our diseases. And then an old hymn came to my wife, moment by moment I'm kept by his power. And she got Brent to the hospital, and by 5 o'clock that day, they had done the bone marrow test, and he had his first chemotherapy. And she had to face that without me present. I got home, I got word, and I got home about 11 o'clock that night. And we were 10 days into the chemotherapy treatment, where he was now neutropenic. His white cells were affected by the chemotherapy, and then he got the toxic shock syndrome. And 3 days later, he's in ICU, in a coma, and in heart failure. We had stayed the 14 days there with him, and finally the doctors insisted we go home that night on the Wednesday night. And they would call us if there was any change. At 6 o'clock in the morning, they called. He'd gone to heart failure. So Connie said, take me where I can pray like I know how to pray.
But at that point, the doctors, what were they saying?
Well,
What was
with
prognosis?
leukemia, there was a fairly decent prognosis because of, but when the toxic shock, there was no record of, we found out later, of a boy having leukemia and toxic shock at the same time. So he went into heart failure, and I rushed to the ICU. She took her to the church so people could come and pray. And that's when your dad called. Called around 9 o'clock, I think, to just see how Brent was. He didn't know about the heart failure.
So it was probably just before going on to 100 Huntley Street.
That's what it was. And so I told him, well, we're in crisis. Brent's dying. And his heart was fibrillating at 250 beats a minute. And the blood pressure was they couldn't keep it up. Oxygen levels were way low. And your dad said, I will go on the program and call people to pray.
And I asked our producer just before, because I just remembered that part of the story just before coming on air here with you. And I said, are we able to find that clip? Any chance we can find it? And we found it. So I go back to 1990, November of 1990, and have a look at what happened on 100 Huntley Street right at that crisis time.
Talking to a very dear friend, Pastor David Shepherd of Hamilton. He's pastor of the church that I once pastored in the city of Hamilton. And he and Connie have several children. Their youngest, 13-year-old Brent, took leukemia, just found out about a few days ago, and some kind of a toxic poisoning set in. And he was saying this morning, half the heart has stopped beating. And I wept with that father on the phone this morning. Lord, I just ask that you'll put your great arms of love around Brent and others, Lord, just as you comforted Cheryl. So, Lord, I pray for mighty miracles of your comfort, miracles of your divine healing. And I thank you. I thank you for that miracle and for being with David and Connie, the parents of little Brent as well. In Jesus' name.
So tell us then what happened right after that.
Well, he went into heart failure about 6 o'clock in the morning, and the nurses were checking him every half hour. And during those hours, all 5 specialists came to me at different times and said, your boy can't live. We don't know how his heart is continuing to function like it is. And later, the oncologist, Dr. Pai, explained to me what was going on. They were giving Brent chemotherapy to kill the leukemia, which destroyed his immune system. He needed immune system to fight the toxic shock. If they quit the chemotherapy, the leukemia would come back and kill him. But because they were giving him chemotherapy, he had nothing to fight the toxic shock with. And they said there was no way he could live. It was only a matter of time. And I remember reassuring them, because they were wondering if we were truly understanding the magnitude of the situation. And I remember saying to them, you make the best choices you can make. We will do what we do, and we'll trust God. And I was in the room when they came to do the final check, all 5 specialists and the nurse that was caring for him. They had checked him at 1, and now it was 15 after, and they came in the room to check him. And the doctor said, literally word for word, the doctor said, hit the machines and take the counts, because there were several monitoring machines. And when he did, the heart rate had already dropped in the 15 minutes from 250 to 180. And the oxygen had come up, and the nurse said to the doctors, there's something wrong with the machines. And they all stopped and turned, and he said, no, that's not possible, hit them again. And in those few minutes, his heart rate dropped to 150. Well, the nurse was so excited, she squealed with delight and hugged me, and later got reprimanded for losing control of her emotions. We told her we appreciated her support. And that's when the toxic shock component gave way to prayer. It was then some time before he came out of the coma. And the journey beyond then was a long one. It was 25 months of chemotherapy every week, brain radiations, spinal chemotherapy, with some other crisis, pancreatitis, blood clots.
So that crisis moment with prayer, and then, doctors couldn't explain why, you didn't, lose your life at that point. But then after that, there was still the time of dealing with the leukemia. We have a couple of photos of during that journey time that you had, and there you are. You look quite thin. Of course, you lost your hair, and then another photo. And this was actually your grade 8 graduation, I understand.
That's right.
So, yourself, Brent, going through this, did you ask questions like, why me?
Absolutely. And I think, it's natural, right? Why is a question that's often asked. And, I've even asked afterwards, and going through this circumstance and being around a lot of kids with cancer, and some of them don't make it. And it's a question you ask then, why did I have cancer? But then also, okay, so why did I survive and not them? And so those questions are asked, and it's natural. And one of the things I've found is that the answer to that question doesn't always come immediately, but it comes throughout your life and as you continue in the journey. And God continues to show me different things of how and what He's done in my life. And just as much as that happens in a life that has survived and has found healing, it also happens in a life that has been comforted in loss. And I've, being a pastor, had the privilege of being with people that have lost loved ones, and to know that God is there, God is with them, and does some really great emotional healing and some miracles of the heart, and really can be there and be a part of that journey of why does this happen, and they begin to see and understand over time what He's doing and how He's doing it. I don't box God in as much anymore in terms of who He's going to heal and how He's going to do it.
And there was concern from the doctors whether you would be able to have children at some point. And we have another photo
Yes.
that kind of answers that question. There they are this year, wonderful family.
Yeah. Well, I joked with you before the show that my first miracle was that I found a wife as beautiful as I did. Then I've got 3 beautiful little daughters. Paige is 8, Avery is 5, and Julia is 3.
Now, David, I know you have opportunity to counsel families often. This was a family journey that your family went through. But there could be some people watching right now who are in a crisis time. They may be given a diagnosis that has them very fearful right now. And I thought just in the closing moments here, maybe you could share with someone, even pray for someone watching.
Well, Brent first began to ask why in the first 2 or 3 days of his crisis. And as pastors, we usually have answers for everything, pet answers. And the impression of the Lord in my heart was, be careful how you answer, because you'll be giving Brent the tools with which he'll interpret his journey. I think it was about 3 days before the Holy Spirit put an answer. I guess the answer was for me as well as him. And it was this. I said, Brent, just because we're believers doesn't exempt us from the trials that are common to mankind in a sin-cursed world. But what it does mean is we have the supernatural help of God to face everything that comes our way. And we have the sovereign purposes of God that He's working in the midst of the nuances of every situation. We could not have imagined we would be sitting here at this point in time when we were beginning that crisis. So I said to Brent, we're not going to focus on why as much as how and what. And we had to revisit that over and over. The purposes of God are sure. There's a verse in Timothy that says, whether we believe or not, he abides faithful. He cannot deny himself. And when we put our hands, our lives in his, he is able to do amazing things. I could easily be here telling the story of the comfort of God in the loss of a loved one. And there was an amazing way which the siblings, our daughter experienced an encounter with the Spirit as she was in the room alone with him when he was in heart failure. Our one son, who's musical, wrote a song entitled, Hold On, Little Brother, Hold On. The older brother was there in the ICU praying. And in their journey, while Brent did his journey, there was a formation work of God happening in the siblings. And so God leaves no one out. And it, for us, was a family journey. And it took emotional. A great organization sent us all there when Brent got so he could walk again, because he lost over 90% of his muscles. You saw the picture, had to be restored. And so that was a long journey. His goal was to walk to his graduation. And that was bow tie. That was the first walk down the aisle of the church to get his graduation.
What an amazing story. If we had more time, there's a lot more you could be saying, but I want to thank you for taking the time. And I want to challenge someone watching right now. Maybe you're in that crisis situation. We've talked about prayer. You can call. You can talk to one of our prayer partners. We'd love to pray with you, all right, about what you're going through. It's available 24/7. So again, thank you, gentlemen. God bless you in your ongoing pastoral ministries.